Alright, this is a response to Ink T off the Pencil Jack forums on his Hunter script. Okay, first thing, I did a few thumbnails as I was going through the first few pages of your script here, and I'm just going to try to talk about a few of the things that I think about as an artist. So, first thing, you have page 1, splash page. A splash page is generally the point in a story where the audience is brought into the story. A splash page to me is when the audience transitions from just following along with a story in minor interest. It's the point where the audience becomes engaged with the story, just fully sucked into the story. In general, say Will Eisner would say that a splash page is all about the mood and the setting of the story. It's not so much about anything else. And to elaborate on that, it sort of means that a splash page tells the audience this is an action story, or this is a mystery suspense story. It tells you sort of the genre of what's going on. You know, this is a sci-fi story. You know, things that you pick up on and you instantly go, okay, I know what kind of story this is. I'm now there. I'm in this world. I'm in the genre of what's going on. That's sort of what a splash page means. And on your splash page here, you had a couple of things going on, and I kind of made a decision on, according to that, of what kind of story this is. And it starts off mid-action, which is good for a story, you know, to start off in the middle of something going on instead of the beginning, just to help suck people in, so that's good. But you have written, we see a man crashing through a window of a high-rise building. He's close in the foreground, and we can see a futuristic cityscape in the background, clean and modern with advanced architecture. The man's trench coat flutters around him as he falls. His arms are outstretched towards the window, firing blindly at the opening. Okay, so that tells me a few things, one of which is you wanted to instantly show that this is science fiction by having some of the setting put in there. And I chose to close in more on the action of what's going on here, because that's really what's more important at this point, to suck the reader into the story. I mean, this is a pretty dramatic moment here you have going on. I didn't want to take away from that by adding other details in. And besides, you go on the next page to be more involved with the actual background and stuff, so I figured I'd leave it for the next page. And now in your captions here, which I've marked on as black on my little thumbnail here, because that'll work pretty much the same way. Your captions on a comic book page are really important to the layout because they're the highest contrast part of a page. They are where your eye goes to. So same difference here, they're higher contrast than the blue. The black sticks out a little more. So I just sort of marked where the captions might be. And I basically have, well, I might as well explain this a little bit just because you can't really tell what this stuff is. Just a basic scribbles here. But that horizontal line there at the bottom of the screen, I basically say that that's the floor of this skyscraper, and it's a busted window that you're looking out of here. There's shattered glass on both sides, so you're looking down out of the building basically, and those scribbles in the middle are the guy falling, and you know, a few more scribbles to the side would be his trench coat, just to sort of, for me to remember that he has a trench coat on. And here he is, firing, his trench coat flailing, you know, and you can see the bottom of his foot there. That's a couple of things I wanted to really show, that he's falling, that he's not standing on the ground, and the action of the trench coat, as well as maybe seeing the bottom of his feet, which right here, I don't know if I'll add that, but it shows if his feet are behind the line, it sort of helps emphasize that he's not grounded and he's falling, as long as I make it clear enough, the angle of the floor and the broken glass, is clear enough in a finished drawing to show that that's the floor, then I can just have his feet behind that line, which will show that he's not inside the building. And here I have his foot, bottom of his foot showing, just to re-emphasize he's not standing. This isn't just like a dramatic upshot of this guy, it's actually of him falling. That's why I wanted to make sure to use that bottom of the shoe there to really explain what's going on, to clarify things for the audience. And I wanted to have, you know, some cars and little things like that in the background, show that, you know, he's really high up in the air. And you can just ignore this. It was just me thinking about the next panel, and which takes place on the next page. And so here we are again. This is the next page. The caption in this first panel was the last caption you had on that first splash page, which again is sort of a, just didn't quite fit with what you had going on. I mean, you got this ultra dramatic action going on, this stuff to drag somebody into the story, saying like, oh, this guy's freaking falling out of a building, oh my god, what's going on? You know, it's sort of your hook into this story. And you have this caption that you want to slap on the page that's a narrator saying, "My name is Merrick and I'm a hunter, or was until I found myself being tossed out of a window 110 stories in the air. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start before the death dive." You know, this just really doesn't go with the action of what you have going on to me. I just don't really like that caption anyway. But because you had it there, I decided to just place it with its own panel, which is fitting for that narration, sort of, for what's going on. It's more of a close-up, you know, close-up of his eyes and him falling, to sort of accentuate also that he's falling with the cars and, you know, things in the background. I can have that exaggerated one-point perspective going on to really exaggerate he's falling. It goes, you know, zoom from the first page. Notice how it zooms in. Intimacy by proximity is how I always like to talk about it. You're being brought into the story. You're getting more and more intimate with this guy's, your main character's conflicts, his dilemma. You're getting closer to him, more intimate. So intimacy by proximity. We're getting closer. Zoomed in. Now on to the next page, even further. And it's to the point where you're almost inside of the guy, which is very introspective shot typically. You know, you going inside of somebody's eyes, you're starting to actually literally get into their head. That's in comic book language, you know, comic book lingo. So that's why I sort of did that panel, and even though I don't really like the caption, it goes with what was going on before, and it continues into what's going on afterwards. Even though there's sort of a transition there in the story, it still fits. So you could always change up, you know, your narration there, and I would think that you would, just seeing what's going on these pages, because, you know, I think it's evident to me, and I think it would be evident to you too, that there's some really dramatic action going on here, and that sort of narration just doesn't really fit with it. And you probably can't even hardly tell what these scribbles are in this next panel, but you wanted the background and, you know, futuristic buildings and this big wide motorcycle and all this stuff. So that's basically just a scribble reminder what that is. So I have these are just background buildings and stuff of a cityscape, basically, and a guy on a motorcycle is approaching the foreground, and he's got somebody strapped on the back of his motorcycle, like a bounty hunter, a Lobo style or something. And that's in the script. Here, maybe I can read it here. It says, we see Merrick on a motorcycle driving through a city on Mars. Towering spires of the environment, simulators dot the landscape. The architecture is more functional and advanced than as seen on Earth. Merrick's motorcycle has fat tires and looks almost as if it is a car on two wheels. Inconspicuous, whatever the hell that word is. Prisoner is cuffed and draped over the back. So that was basically what that second panel is, and the third panel here is Merrick's bike stops in front of the local police, parked half on the curb, half off, people walking past him, giving him sideways glances. And that's basically what that is. I need to, make sure, give some symbols that show that this is a police station and he's parking his bike and whatnot. And I did a couple of things here that don't jive with your script either, but they work with how I'm setting things up as far as page turns here. Is you have these captions narrating the story, which again, I marked a couple of them just with a black line to show where the eye would be flowing on the page here a little bit. You have this extra caption that you have going with the first panel of the next page, which, I don't really think you need for a few reasons, because you already have a word balloon in that panel. So as far as layout is concerned, you've already got that contrasting element for the eyes to go to. So what I did is added it as just that last panel on the bottom right part of a page for a page turn for suspense. This is the fun part. And what's the fun part? You want to turn the page. That's a page turn thing. It's one of the tricks in the industry that people do. You have a caption in the top left corner of the page, which is typical. You always want the caption before the panel. That's just the way it goes. And because of the contrast, your eye is going to go to the highest contrast thing first, which is usually the caption or word balloon. That's why it usually goes first before the actual drawing, because it's higher contrast. And you have one on the very lower right hand side part of the page for the page turn, which in essence creates a caption without a panel. As you're reading a comic book, you're reading a caption, looking at the panel, a caption, looking at the panel, a caption, looking at the panel. That's a rhythm that's established through the reading of a comic book. And what you're doing here aids in the page turn transition, because you're creating a caption with no panel. So you read the caption, you're going to want to turn the page to see the panel. That's basically what that is. You'll see that a lot. And here you see how that works. This is the next page, and he's already got this exciting "he kicks the doors in" panel that I actually took from the previous page from your script here and put it as the first panel on this page, just because it worked for me. And you already have a word balloon here. A guy kicking in the door, and he's carrying his bounty here with him. He kicks in the door and says, "Delivery for Major Dick." So it would be kind of redundant to have a caption above that. So you're basically just saying, oh, this is the fun part directly to, and then your eye is going to go directly to this word balloon here. So it's sort of like, there's no suspense in that. There's no fun in reading that. It doesn't aid the page turn transition or anything, or writers really just, your job is transitions. How to keep somebody interested in every transition. It's the same whether you're writing in prose or a cartoonist is drawing it. That the writer's job or the cartoonist's job, if the cartoonist is writing for himself, it's all about keeping the audience involved with every transition. So I did it that way for the page turn, and you got some extra action involved here with the kicking in the door and all that. So that's why I did that. And so just let me go through your script here a little bit. So we're on, this is the fun part, and then Merrick says, "Delivery for Major Dick." Panel 4, a large man comes storming out of his office, pointing at Merrick. He's overweight and stressed out, looking and angry, and that's just basically this right next to that panel there, which these are just thumbnails, but I've got the captions in there a little bit and follow what's going on. But the point is, you have all of both of these panels still being on page 2, this last page, so you weren't really thinking about transitions as far as the page turn and all that. So my page count is getting screwy here, and that's really, I don't know how to put it. You could say that I'm screwing things up and I'm not following your script, and it isn't how you wrote it and all of that, and it is just up to the artist, or it's up to you, whatever. But my main point is that it seems that you weren't thinking so much about everything that gets done on a comic book page is done for a reason. A page ends a certain way because it's supposed to emphasize the page turn. My analogy that I like to use is every page is a paragraph. In a comic book, each page of a script is basically a paragraph, and every panel is a simple sentence. Guy kicks in door. Boss comes out of office screaming, and everybody's looking at him and stuff. And, you know, the guy drops his captive on the floor as his boss is yelling at him, where you been, and shut up, and all that. And so every panel boils down to a simple sentence. And I mean, you got descriptions, you do have some problems going on here. You're talking about the big fat boss comes out of the office and this and that. And then, you know, 2 panels later, I think it's the panel description after this one, which I haven't drawn, you say, and the boss is a foot shorter than Merrick. It's like, shouldn't you have said that a couple of panels ago? You know, you need to think about establishing what's going on first. That's really the only real, you know, an artist doesn't need fancy descriptions so much. An artist needs the simple action of a sentence. You know, you need a subject and an action. Guy kicking in a door. That's a subject and an action. And that's really what the artist needs. And descriptions are sort of, yeah, you throw in a little here and there. But really, I mean, that is the basic description you should have had in the first place. Is this guy is a foot shorter than, you know, your main character. So don't be drawing them next to each other in one panel and then re-establishing. Don't be establishing things too late in your script. But basically, that's sort of what I wanted to sink in with you is, don't just say, I want this page to be a 4-panel page, because, 4 panels will work in a page. And then the next page go, we'll call this a 5-panel page. For no reason. I mean, each page should basically be an idea that, you know, a section of the story. And the transition that rolls between pages is the same transition that exists in prose between one paragraph and the next. That's how these things work. This is a visual language. A couple more things of why I did things the way I did things, if they don't make a lot of sense to you. I already explained sort of why it's a little bit of an issue to have a splash page as your first page, but, you know, it works well enough, I suppose. Why is there no background per se on the first page like you explained it? Well, it's a little bit easy to write that there's somebody in the foreground and then there's all this background you want to show, but it's not necessarily how it works when you draw things. If there's somebody in the foreground, there's not a whole lot of room to put background around them. And, you know, I could draw a big building with a little dot coming out of the side of the building with, looks like somebody flew out a window, which might actually go with your narration a little bit better than the guy being all up close. But I sort of chose to do the close-up and leave the background for the next page because I'm introducing the character. It's one of those old cardinal rule or whatever you'd want to call it. Just a typical thing that comic book people do is to get good intros of the characters at the beginnings of stories. You know, you don't want to introduce people when we're looking at the back of their head, or introduce your main character as a silhouette on the horizon, you know, 500 feet away, that sort of deal. So that's sort of why I chose to get the close-up action shot, sort of. And even though it's not a whole lot of a splash page, because it's in essence it's a moment-to-moment transition, 2 panels sort of, but it's got the tilted camera effect basically, which helps here to jar the reader to be like unsettled, like, oh, this guy is falling. It's just an extra thing. That's why I did that way. And you know, it sort of emphasizes time, you know, taking place. This is like slow motion. In comic books, the more panels you have, it actually makes things slower. It doesn't speed them up. So it is sort of like a slow motion. This guy is falling, right? and the camera is tilted to unsettle the reader, saying, "Oh, I'm not standing on firm ground here. Things are askew." I also liked the effect of how the tilted outlook of what's going on here unsettles us, and that's sort of why I also enjoyed going from, you know, zoom in on these. Another thing it's always good to take advantage of, I think, in a moment-to-moment transition, as Scott McCloud would call it, like this, the best way to utilize that is to animate what's going on. And since you're going to have flickering fabric and, you know, things falling and all that, it makes it really animated. I mean, I'm going to have his hair flipping about, you know, his jacket flipping about. So having a moment-to-moment transition like that aids in animation. Wait. My dog there is beating up my other dog there, see? Anyway, what I was getting at is I also enjoy the effect, since we're going from moment to moment panels like this, the camera, if you think about it, is actually going out of the window and falling off of the building with the character. So that's kind of an unsettling position to put the reader in also, which I think is kind of cool. So we're basically looking out the window at a guy falling, and then we're getting closer so we can see his feet now. So we're sort of coming out of the window onto the next page, where we're basically falling with the guy to the ground. So I kind of like that. That's why I kind of did that way. I thought it was cool. Those word balloons are correct. I just wasn't talking about them right. But another reason why I transitioned the way I did is because a guy kicking through doors, entering a building, and pronouncing something loudly for everyone to hear, you know, he's making himself a spectacle. That's a real action scene. And the best payoff that you get from any transition in a comic book is from the page turn. You turn the page and then boom, it's right in your face. So the guy kicking open the door and all that, you had it as sort of like a middle panel on the last page with umpteen panels and all this, and like I say, you know, a caption that says "this is going to be fun" to a balloon that says "delivery for Major Dick." You know, that's kind of redundant, but it works real well for the page turn. So that's, you know, reason number 2 why I did a page turn right in the middle of your how you had the pages set up there, was because this is such an action shot. I mean, you can't, whether or not you were trying to write things for each page, and I'm just totally wrong about how your thinking was in writing this script. You can't have every action or every panel be a big exploding action panel, because it'll just fizzle. You gotta have some variety in there, and so I made that another page. You know, get the payoff for the page turn, have the big action shot, first panel on the page, and then, you know, go into, you know, backing the camera off, less intimate, just conversation. You know, you don't have to be face to face in a conversation like this, just bickering. You know, hey, up yours, boss. You know, yeah, up yours, Buster. You know, it's not an intimate conversation. Doesn't matter. So I backed things off a little bit for that. But that's also another reason why, you know, I did the page turn there, because if I had, you know, let's see how many, 4 panels on page 2, which includes the big cityscape scene, pulling up in front of the police station panel, and also kicking the doors inside of the police station and making his announcement. And then another panel that says a large man comes storming out of his office and blah blah blah. New page. You know, it's like all that stuff on a page. Why? And why does it all of a sudden change to another page after that? You know, it just really didn't really seem thought out. But, you know, and I hope you don't take too much issue with me for saying so, but that's just how I see it. another thing I wanted to mention, which I didn't really draw very well here, and this isn't really a writer's thing, but it's more of just artist advice here, but I also did this for a reason. You got guys standing indoors, and I got kind of repetitive with that here, but it's a spotting blacks thing. Ah, dang it. It's a spotting blacks thing to have, you know, your main character, the main subject of a panel, to be surrounded by blacks, framing blacks, you know, just so your eye goes directly from this to the central character of this panel. So I have him in a doorway, but that also plays an important role. Let me see if I can see if I blackened in all of this doorway that he's standing in here. See, imagine all that is dark around him, so he's sort of framed in the black there. That would make it obvious that he's the central element of that panel, but it also does a couple of other things. He's coming out as an authority figure. He's the boss, which has been established in the script already. And I have him sort of standing with his feet widespread apart, which is an authoritative stance. You see police and you see your boss in that sort of stance with your legs wide apart, claiming more territory, in essence, is the body language that says. And so he's doing that, but it also gets accentuated by the doorway. You have a guy standing wide-legged in a doorway, you're basically saying that that person is a gate. That person is blocking that doorway. He's claiming the doorway. That's mine. So that's sort of an ominous thing too. It's just in a person's psyche to say, you see a person blocking a doorway that's in the silhouette of a doorway. That's something that strikes everybody as significant. So I did that because he's an authority and because his body language is going to say it anyway, so I have him in the door there. That's sort of why I did that. And it's like an artist thing, like I say. And I could also do that in the next panel. It also could create some more tension between what's going on here in this panel if he's still in the doorway. Because this seems a little uncomfortable. Why is somebody standing in a doorway like that? I mean, is the protagonist here heading in that direction because he expected to go into the office? You know, it's all this stuff that's like not really said, not really in the script, doesn't really matter, but visually it creates tension, saying like, why is that guy even walking in that direction when this guy is blocking a doorway? You know, it creates tension, and it creates the authority that this boss figure already has. So I just thought that would be a little bit worth mentioning. Doorways, things like that, they are visual symbols in this medium of comic books, and I just thought that might be something of interest to share.